Hello and a very warm welcome to the second webinar in our Finance is Female series. I'm Helen Avery, ESG contributing editor at Euromoney magazine. And as you can see, I have with me three guests today. We have Adebola Osakwe, Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity at KKR. Welcome, Adebola. Nandita Bakhshi, President and CEO of Bank of the West, BNP Paribas. Welcome, and Brandee McHale, Head of Community Investment and Development at Citi. So we're thrilled that you, our audience, can join us. I'm so grateful to have this wonderful panel with us today to talk about how the finance sector can play a role in bringing forth through their businesses as a whole the systemic change that we really need around gender and racial and ethnic diversity and inclusion. So these are such pertinent topics, and I know it's going to be a really, really rich discussion. So before we get going, just some housekeeping as people are coming in. We are joined in the invisible by our producer, Philippa Shipley. She's our tech whiz, and we're helping with the poll, but she's also on call on the Q&A bar if you have any technical difficulties, although I think by this point we're all Zoom experts. And a quick disclaimer. Firstly, you should know that you are on mute, but this virtual panel is being recorded. And we're going to share a link to the recording so you can access it afterwards. Secondly, this is for information purposes only, and we have to let you know that we are not giving investment or transaction advice, and all views are expressed are those of the participants, not of Euromoney. All comments are public and on record, and all content is copyright Euromoney Institutional Investor 2020. So with that said, we have a lot to get through, and we want to leave a lot of time for Q&A for our panel afterwards. So just to run you through the format, we're going to talk for about 25 minutes before we open up to Q&A. However, you're welcome to start putting your questions into the Q&A chat through the Q&A button. If you are directing that question at a specific panelist, if you could just highlight that in there, it just makes my life easier. You'll also see the ability to upvote the questions that maybe you like, that so we can take the most popular ones first. But to start, we wanted to ask you a question first. So Philippa, I wonder if you can just bring us up our first poll. And it's really just sort of to get things going. Is the institution or organization you're working for responding to the inequalities that have become more apparent during COVID-19? We're interested to hear what the feedback that you've been seeing at your organizations and institutions are. And you'll see this question isn't asking whether there are inequalities that have become more apparent over COVID-19. We are saying yes, that they have. And in fact, we had a webinar, our first webinar sort of shone a light on gender inequality that has sort of become more in the spotlight due to COVID-19. And then also, as we've seen as the pandemic has raged on, it's minority communities that have been disproportionately affected, be it health or loss of income, inability to access healthcare perhaps, or access finance and support. And then after the killing of George Floyd at the end of May, systemic racism is now been put in the spotlight globally in a way that we haven't witnessed really since the first civil rights movement. And we are seeing protests continue in cities around the world calling for action to be taken. So we're interested to see whether there's been a response from your organization to any of these points already. So first, so we get going, I wanted to come to you, Bola, and welcome again. With this sort of framing, do you see that, maybe the past few months, what's been going on has made financial institutions or maybe the financial community as a whole reassess inclusion and diversity strategies?
Hi, Helen. Thanks so much for having me. Glad to join today. I think that every sector is reevaluating their inclusion and diversity efforts. I think even if you take within financial services, they're the big bulge bracket banks that many know have been at this for many, many years. And even those organizations and institutions are taking a look at their efforts, their strategy, their focus, and fine-tuning in some ways the way in which they're actioning around diversity and inclusion. And for those that are headquartered and focused in the US, that's a much more intentional lens around race and specifically Black or African-American employees, and really having a focus on that space as it relates to recruiting, retaining, developing, thinking beyond their own organizations. How do they play in the broader community, and what kind of impact could they have with the broader community, whether it's financing, whether it's supplier diversity. I think for my particular space, which is private equity, I'd say that we're probably a little bit further behind than the investment banks in terms of focusing on inclusion and diversity. However, I think that many are, if they hadn't started to lean into this space in the last 3 to 5 years, are absolutely focusing on it today, and seeing and recognizing that it's important. I think their employees are raising their voices and indicating that they feel that it's important that this company reevaluate or take a more intentional stand and focus around inclusion and diversity. So I do think that this has really created, in some lack of a better term, a reboot for better, lack of better focus for organizations to really double down on their inclusion and diversity efforts.
It's interesting you say that the private equity sector may be a little bit behind. Now, at KKR, you've actually been doing a lot in this field, and I wonder if you can sort of share with us your approach and hopefully influence others.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as an industry, I definitely would say private equity is a bit further behind than the investment banks. I'm proud to say, though, that KKR was one of the leaders in terms of thinking about inclusion and diversity. About 5 years ago, I joined the firm to focus on the inclusion and diversity efforts and really build out the strategy globally. And for us, it's about both the firm, KKR itself, and how do we action and drive inclusion and diversity within our own organization. And that takes the form of recruiting, retaining, developing our own talent. But I think for a private equity firm that has incredible influence and impact in the broader community around our portfolio companies, really thinking about how can you be innovative and creative in leveraging the much broader community of the portfolio companies and drive impact. And that could take the form of just employment and jobs and creating opportunity. It could take the form of supplier diversity and really managing and navigating the suppliers that those portfolio companies support and work with. There's obviously also the philanthropic efforts and the organizations that you can partner with. But I think there's a real opportunity to scale the work beyond our own individual firms and think much more broadly about how can we have impact. And so at KKR, that's really what we've been doing for the last 5 years. And I would say we've also taken the opportunity to rethink our inclusion and diversity strategy, be more intentional, in some ways, double down on certain efforts to ensure that we start to have meaningful progress. And for us, what I think is also important is that our clients are really focused on both the diversity of our organization and the impact that our firm can have in the broader environment. And so for those reasons, beyond the firm feeling as though diversity really will make us better investors, our clients are also seeking and pushing us in that direction as well.
Thanks, Bola. And maybe we'll drill down a bit later into some of the things you've been working with. I know around the sort of board representation and on the portfolio companies. So moving to you, Nandita, and welcome again. Touching on sort of this latter point of Bola's about sort of clients influencing systemic change through your clients. I'm just interested, what are you sort of seeing from clients now? What's their feedback right now?
Yeah, great question. And Bola, what a great answer to the questions that Helen asked. And Helen, thank you for inviting me to this panel, because it's great to be talking about these very relevant, very topical issues that are going on today. Your question about what are we doing with our clients is a fantastic question, because we can't do it alone. While we are extremely ESG minded at BNP Paribas, we recognize that we by ourselves cannot bring about the change that is required in the world. So we actively work with our customers and embed within our relationship with them and giving them financial benefits of having KPIs like diversity and inclusion and ESG in their programs. So I'll give you a few examples. And we're doing this globally. So in the Americas, for example, we actually had a sustainability linked loan with a company where the interest rates goes down as they meet their KPIs, whether it is women on the board, whether it's women in management, whether it is the carbon emission, revenue through green targets, all of that, right? So this is exactly what we want, because we want customers to own this themselves, and they get from the bank financial benefits for actually making these good things happen. Similarly, in Europe, for example, and Bola talked about it, we have the largest ESG-linked subscription credit with a private equity firm, because that's exactly where we want to bring about the change. And I really like the fact that we're doing this with a private equity firm, because these organizations in their portfolio have several organizations that they can have an impact on, right? So again, the KPIs are very similar. Women in management, women on boards, women in serious P&L positions, ESG, green type of targets. And we look at their KPIs and we actually give them financial benefit for doing the right thing. And I'll also tell you, back home in the US, as the CEO of Bank of the West, we recently participated in one of the US government's programs called Paycheck Protection Program, where we help nearly 20,000 small businesses give loans to them. And this truly went to the small businesses, because close to 80% of our loans were $150,000 or less. We believe we kept 300,000 jobs by participating in these loans. So that's exactly what we are doing, and we're doing it globally, not just in the US, not just in Europe, but globally through the 72 entities in various countries that BNP Paribas operates in.
Thanks, Nandita. And actually on this point, as sort of mentioned earlier, there's been a disparity in those who have access to finance during this period. I think we've all seen that, and it's minority communities in particular that have not been able to access finance. I wonder if you can share with us, because, and we talked a bit about this between us earlier, that the importance of financial inclusion, and I know that you do work in microfinance, but how that might be a route to sort of create greater equity through business.
Helen, you're absolutely right. This pandemic crisis has really impacted more women, individuals of color, real small businesses and entrepreneurs. And I really believe that if we have to have a recovery that's sustainable, a recovery that makes the businesses resilient, we have to be inclusive. And BNP Paribas has been working on some of these initiatives even before the pandemic, but they just become so much more important during pandemic. We, of course, have made $55 million donation to various hospitals and vulnerable communities during this process. But you mentioned our work in microfinance, and I think that's very, very important, because microfinance, in my estimation, is extremely important, because we are providing resources and we are providing capital, access to capital to women and to underserved communities. So working with the United Nations, we're working on a program where we are providing Senegalese women, about 15,000 farmers, women farmers, financial benefit. We're providing them financial education, legal education, and providing technology that they so badly need. In Colombia, for example, we are financing micro borrowers to help, again, farmers understand the impact of climate change. And we are bringing in not just microfinance, but green microfinance to the world. We've had long-standing relationship with Grameen, and I serve on the board of Grameen America. And last year, we, and when I say we, I mean Mohammed Yunus, the founder of Grameen, Andrea Young, the CEO of Grameen America, my team and myself, we helped set up a brand new branch for Grameen in Fresno, California. And while California is a rich state, and you must have heard that, but Fresno has women, 76,000 women living under the poverty line. And we hope that this will bring about a change in Fresno, in the Fresno community. And this will, the investment that we made of $2 million will impact over 7,000 women, help them become entrepreneurs and really pull them out of poverty. So very excited about that. The other point I would mention, you mentioned the fact that, again, the pandemic is impacting the migrant community. Yeah. One of the programs that BNP has through a subsidiary called McHale, it's available in France, and it's essentially providing simple and easy banking services to hundreds and thousands, actually 1.6 million of the folks in the French community. And again, as we look at the income level of these individuals, they are mostly from the migrant community and their income is less than 1,500 euro. So again, a terrific, terrific program being offered to people that need it. Our BNP asset management team actually takes stewardship extremely seriously. I was reading this McKinsey article that came out some time back that talked about the fact that as you have more diversity and more representation of women in boards, there's a correlation with the profitability of the organization. And our BNP Paribas asset management team is actually now putting that as a proxy vote. They are going to be supporting companies that have representation of as much as 30% in the female representation in the board. So we're doing various things to really, really bring about a change in the vulnerable, in the underserved community by providing money, providing resources, and most importantly, by providing financial education.
Thank you, Nandita. So, we're beginning to sort of see it's work through hiring talent and making sure, we've got the right, we have the right representation reflective of our society on our boards and in our senior management. It's working with our clients to make sure that where we can influence them to do the same. And we've talked about some of that. It's through some of the products that we're putting out there, like loans, accessible loans. So coming to you, Brandee, now, and thanks for being with us today. Citi has been working in community development for decades, and we're looking to solve for racial inequality, gender inequality, wealth inequality. And you and I have talked about actually recently how all that's being reimagined, perhaps in light of what we're seeing now in the last few months. So can you share with us about that?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you for having me here. I was thinking about and preparing for today and thinking about how we've been reimagining our work. And what I realized is really the reimagining is about reimagining our mindset first. It's not just, we are so quick to rush to what's a program, what's a product, what's an initiative. And we need to use this moment. I think we have an opportunity to really change our mindset about how we think about these issues and challenges. How are we thinking about it at Citi and reimagining our mindset? I mean, the first thing is to acknowledge that the playing field just is not even. The playing field is not level for everybody. And that the idea, and in particular when we think about racial equity, trying to be colorblind, trying to think about equality versus equity, just continues to reinforce the status quo. And what does the status quo look like? I mean, it's really shocking that we need to get this information out there. Just in the US context alone, okay, if you were to look at family and household wealth, if average Black family wealth in the US continued to grow at the same pace it has over the past 3 decades, and you held white household growth constant, it would take 228 years for Black households to catch up to white households in the US. And just to really bring that into context, that is 17 years less than we had slavery, the 245 years that we had slavery here in the United States. So we need to change our mindset. We need to be incredibly intentional. And I think we need to bring a sense of urgency. So one of the things that we're doing, it builds on some of the things my colleagues here have said, really doubling down and being very intentional about targeting and investing in institutions led by people of color, whether they're small businesses, they're larger corporations, they're community-based organizations, public sector leaders, and really be clear that it's not just enough to say we're against racism. I don't think there's anybody that would say I'm not against racism, but we need to make that shift. The mindset shift is moving from how do we go from saying we're against racism to actively being anti-racist? And what are we going to actually do through our actions? There is no silver bullet. There is no one single approach. We can't just have a community response. We can't just have an HR diversity response. We can't just have a business client investment response. Really think we need to have an all-in response. And that's part of the mindset shift, is that we've tended in companies in the private sector to silo the way we respond to these issues. And I think what we're seeing is this really, comprehensive, all in within our institutions. And then I will echo what Nandita said, it's all in with others in our industry as well. This is not the time, if we really want to move the needle, for competition. It's for more cooperation.
Yeah, I've often wondered, actually, sort of just rambling off to the side here, why we haven't had a collective group for diversity and inclusion within the financial community. I mean, we have them on everything. There's coalitions on everything, just not this. And it's never made sense to me. So that's my...
Look, this is my armchair psychology, moment. So you gave the disclaimers in the beginning. I'll just say as an individual, and my experience, 25 years in the financial services sector, this is a really uncomfortable topic. This is really hard. And it really requires you to acknowledge, not just, you can't separate, institutions are just made up of people. We're individuals that collectively come together and build the values of an institution. And so I think in this topic, it also requires us to look at how we are as institutions, as individuals, first and foremost, either consciously or subconsciously continuing to promote the status quo. I think it's really hard. I can tell you in the era that I grew up in, it was, not even recently, even saying the word racist. I think this is the first time in my professional career that I have heard the term racism used within a professional context, and not fear. And still there's a little part of me that in the back of my head goes, oh, be careful, you're not going over the line. Well, why not? So I think that's part of it, is I think we're on this personal journey and we're on an institutional journey. And I think you're beginning to see the companies are now going to come together and work in a different way on this particular issue.
Thank you. I think you make such a good point that it's not a one and done. It's not a project or a program. It's sort of asking every single day, what are we doing that is maybe perpetuating the systemic inequities that we see?
Yeah, and I would just, add to that I was in a really interesting conversation with a Black colleague recently, who said, because we keep continuing to want to have dialogue and have conversation. And the feedback that I got from that conversation was, I know, I live in, I experience it every single day. I understand what it is. It's the dialogue needs to happen within, our white colleagues need to be having these conversations. And please don't put it on my shoulders to fix it. You know, I'm experiencing it, but we need to flip, I think, how we've looked at this and really take ownership of it and accountability in a different way.
Thanks, Brandee. Before we move to Q&A, does anyone, Bola, Nandita, any sort of comments you want to chime in on there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, Bola, go ahead.
I was just going to echo what Brandee said around, I think there's been a real awareness that existed in some communities and wasn't sort of realized in others. And I think what's taking place today is, you know, the George Floyd incident brought everything to light in a very real experience with people visibly watching what took place. And I think for some communities that wasn't shocking, new, surprising. It happens with regularity to individuals and has been happening. And for others, there was a bit more of an awakening around, I can't believe this is happening. It's happening on being recorded. It's being, you know, there's a sense of lackadaisicalness around this and a nonchalance that people observed. And I think that change is what has allowed individuals to maybe pay more attention and pay more attention to the things that they may be doing and maybe aren't doing, that as a result are continuing the status quo. And as a result, that is what's hopefully going to really create change. And to the earlier statement, you know, my hope is that this really isn't a moment and this ends up really being a movement, because if we think back 4 or 5 years ago, the Black Lives Matter, really sparked then as a result of a number of incidences that were happening in the US. And then we moved to another topic, you know, over the course of a couple of years, it died out and it has picked back up. But I think for many, it's sort of a hopefulness that the inclusion of individuals that are participating in this movement, the number of diverse individuals who are outraged and speaking up and raising their voices will in fact have much more of a tail on the changes that come and allow it to really have a sustained impact.
Yeah, I love that, from a moment to a movement. Nandita.
Yeah, I was just going to add and say that when this was going on in the US and people were protesting, not just in the US, in different cities, but all across the world, that message of solidarity was, I think, so important. And our teams in the US recognizing that our employees are sitting in their homes and we don't know how they're feeling about things, right? Because while we are being very productive, being virtual, but we've lost that connection, that water cooler conversation that in times of trouble can really bring us together. That lack of engagement was happening. So I really want to commend our resource group, our African American resource group, who set up a virtual webinar, essentially a call like this, very quickly. And we had hundreds of participants come into that call and share their own stories. And again, we had people from all walks of life, all ethnic, gender and diversity in that call. And people that were not living it every day were shocked to hear some of these stories, right, from their peers. And it just made it a very cathartic and at the same time, a very safe environment to be, because nobody was taking notes and being judgmental about that, right? Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to share that with you to say, it's really brought us together as we talk, and we've now kind of taken that on as saying, okay, there's a need, there's a hunger there in our employee base, and how do we support it, and how do we make sure that they know that they can speak up.
You know, I just want to add one thing to this, and it occurs to me that, you know, a crisis moment sparked outrage. And I think our pattern, when I say we need to think about reimagining our mindset, also we tend to think about a response being a solution to a problem. And I just want to encourage all of us that as we reimagine our mindsets, that we think about this as adopt an abundance mindset. Just the pure economics, take out the social part, forget the socioeconomic argument, just the economic case. you know, here in the US by 2040 will be a minority majority country. This is just really makes a lot of business sense. So even if you're not approaching it from the social justice standpoint, just from an economic standpoint. And so I think that it's you know, again, I think of this as also, it's an opportunity to solve, not necessarily a problem to solve.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of saying it. And that's how, you know, we have approached a climate of trying to sort of, you know, say, if this is an opportunity, this is the future, what are we doing by ignoring this, as in addition to sort of the environmental issues that we're going to say for it. So why wouldn't we apply exactly the same thinking to this? So I wanted to get onto some questions. I hadn't seen the answers to the poll, and I wondered if it's possible just to bring that up while I'm looking through these questions, or did I miss it? Okay, well, this is a positive response. Is the institutional organisation you're working for responding to the inequalities that have become more apparent? 71% say yes. So now it's going to be measuring the impact of those responses. And I saw actually there is a question on this. What are the challenges around measuring impact of your work? Bola, should we start with you about how you're sort of measuring impact, whether it's hiring or board representation or partnerships and community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we, you know, look, we're in a data-driven environment, and quite frankly, the data speaks to individuals. So you do need to have an understanding of where are you today, and therefore you can take and get an understanding of where are you tomorrow, and have you in fact made progress given the actions and steps you've taken. And so for us, measurement is really important when we implement any sort of diversity and inclusion strategy or effort. It's not always easy to measure. You know, when we started, you know, measuring inclusion is probably one of the more challenging things to measure, whereas measuring diversity and representation is a much easier metric to measure. You just look at the percentage of your population today and take a look at whether or not the steps you've taken have increased or decreased over, you know, a time horizon, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, to see whether or not you're making progress. You can also take a look at attrition. Are you losing individuals? And if so, are your diverse individuals departing at a faster rate than your non-diverse individuals? And then it requires a double click to understand the reasons why. Is it cultural? Is it progression? Is it systemic? Is it performance? What's really at play, so that you can then address the challenges that need to be addressed within that moment. I think the other things that we've, you know, spent some time thinking about is, you know, to the inclusion point, we run an engagement survey annually, and it's important to take a look at all the diversity dimensions around what's important to us. You know, are individuals feeling a sense of belonging? Are individuals feeling as though their managers are, you know, helping to develop and progress them? Do they feel as though they are advancing within the organization? And are those responses different for minorities in your organization versus non-minorities? And that can give you a sense for where there may be gaps and opportunities for your organization to address. And so I'd say for us, you know, the main levers for measuring are, we measure our hiring, we measure our retention and attrition, we measure engagement of individuals, we measure the funnel of the talent pool to see if there are gaps there. So their measurement is definitely important, and thinking about how do you understand where you are today and where do you want to go gives people direction and an understanding of whether progress is being made.
Thank you. Nandita, do you want anything you want to share about measuring for impact?
Yeah, so I would say what gets measured actually gets executed upon, right? We're mostly all type A personality. We're looking at KPIs and we see what we want to do. But I think Bola raised a very good point, which is, of course, we can measure our numbers, but how do we make sure that we're creating an inclusive environment? And I think that's where listening, that's where talking to people and finding out if they're feeling not just being included, but also being part of the party, that their voice is heard is so important. One of the things I'm extremely proud of is 30% of my management team comprises of women. About 50% if you look at diverse from an ethnicity and gender. And that has not just happened. I insist on a diverse slate when I look for any single hire, at least 2 down from me, and I expect my direct reports to do the same. So this is a journey we're on. We absolutely, to Bola's point, we have to look at the bench strength because they are the future leaders of the organization. Starting as I'm an immigrant to this country. I'm a first generation immigrant. I came to this country 35 years ago. I started as a part-time teller, even though I had a master's degree, because that's the only thing I could get because I had to prove myself in this country, right? So I recognize the journey that folks have to go through to establish themselves, especially when they don't have, network in this country to begin with. So I'm particularly sensitive to that. And one of the things I do is I go out and listen to people. I go out to to the field very often and essentially ask the question, how are you doing? What could I do to support you? Now that I'm not out in the field, I do it virtually. So again, numbers are very important, but creating an inclusive environment that's safe and we are asking people to bring their authentic self to work is just as important.
Thank you. Brandee, how are you looking at measuring impact of the work you're doing out in community?
Yeah, it's interesting. First I will say that when we think about community level change, unfortunately, change does not come in nice 12-month budget cycle increments. So you do have to take a bit of a long view. But I think for us, what's happening is something very important. And it's when again, we have to think about institutional racism. We have to think about what are the processes and that we have in place that actually continue to support the status quo. So I'll give you a very, I think, try to give you a straightforward example. It seems so simple, it's hard to break the pattern. So we've been really focused for years on performance-based investing, whether it's in our traditional philanthropic investing and our impact investing, because we really want to look at how are our dollars going to drive results. And when you step back and you really say, if that's what we're doing, we are naturally actually self-selecting without even considering up-and-coming leaders who may not have the same networks. If it's an organization led by a person of color, organizations led by people of color tend not to have the same fund access to high net worth individuals to be able to raise funds. And so we're just stopping and saying, maybe we've emphasized the wrong metric. It's not to say that there's not going to be accountability for delivering, but we need to be very intentional about selecting and investing in organizations led by people of color and redesigning the screens that we use to make those choices. And sometimes it's not just the money, it may also be the access to the knowledge, the networks, the technical assistance that's needed. That's playing out both again in our philanthropy, but also in looking at what's our role within the financial services industry. We see minority depository institutions here in the US, Black-led banks. We have an opportunity to partner with them and help them utilize the systems that we have as this giant global financial institution. Very concrete example, we've made our ATMs in the US available to minority-led banks so that their clients can access funds, no fee, from our ATM network. It doesn't cost a lot of money, it creates access, why not do it? So that's another way that we're investing in minority-led institutions.
Okay, thank you, Brandee. Thinking about these sort of like specific things that we can do that I'd love for you to share that you're doing. There's a question here, it's about hiring and making sure that we're doing the right things with our hiring. Bola, would you mind sharing about the, I know that you've looked at this in detail around the analyst roles as well. If you could you share with us how you're looking at it?
Yeah, so, look, I think in hiring diverse talent and having that be a focus, it's really important, the messaging and communication of how you articulate the effort. I think it's important that you start with a desire to hire the best and brightest individuals. And in no way, shape, or form does that mean that if you're hiring a diverse individual, you are diminishing the best and the brightest components. There are a lot of really talented, strong, diverse individuals out there. A lot of the challenge is finding and identifying those individuals. I think it's, given what Brandee said about networks and access, many times there just isn't a knowledge about the opportunities that are available. And so they may not readily put themselves in your applicant pool. And so you may have to do a little bit more to really reach and access those individuals. So for KKR, a lot of our hiring happens at the lateral level. We hire for individual roles for those who are experienced. And that is how we grow talent and bring individuals into the organization. What we decided to do 2 years ago was to restart our analyst program in an effort to have a broader pool of diverse talent that we could pull from. Obviously have the ability to train and develop individuals who are more junior. We then can leverage college campuses and external organizations that have diverse talent to market our efforts, and quite frankly, taking a number of extra steps to help ensure that those individuals are prepared and competitive in the process. A lot of times it's just more a lack of knowledge and readiness, not a lack of wherewithal and ability. I liken it a lot of times to, applying to college and taking the SATs. You may take the SATs, and if you show up that day to take the SATs and don't do well, it's not that you're not smart, but if you had taken the preparatory classes, you would have an idea of what the test was, what you're being evaluated on, and likely be that much more successful. And so we have taken a lot of those steps to help prepare diverse individuals, both who are from non-target schools that don't traditionally, show up in our pools, but also ethnic and gender diverse individuals. So it meant doing prep sessions. It meant doing Ask Me Anything sessions. It meant informational sessions around our business to help those individuals feel more comfortable and feel as though they had a better understanding of our organization and maybe our culture and our people. So when they showed up for those interviews, they showed up well. And for many of them, they are doing quite well in our process. And so our analyst pool and our class tends to be quite diverse comparative to maybe later on in the recruiting cycle where the pools are much more shallow.
Right. Nandita, any thoughts about how to change this pool that we're pulling from, or what you're doing at Bank of the West perhaps around ensuring that you're having a diverse workforce throughout the entire workforce?
Yeah, and I actually draw inspiration, if I may even call it that, from my own example. Again, like I said, I came to this country 35 years ago, started as a part-time teller. And somewhere along the way, I found out that if I'm a P&L owner, I'm making the decisions. So I very deliberately moved over to managing a P&L, and I stayed there, right? And that has really done well for me. And as I look at individuals, especially women, and I look at just not in my organization, but universally in different financial institutions, you do not see too many women in managing large P&Ls. And that's something that I really want to change. I want to alter that. And I believe that comes from the fact that women feel that they have to be performing at 150% level to take a job. And that is not true for our male counterparts. So I now talk about something that has worked for me, which is the rule of the thirds, right? I have historically in my career taken a job where I felt I could do a third of the job very comfortably. A third was stretch, and the last third was white knuckle stress. Because I found out that in that white knuckle stress, I really grew and I really flourished. So I actually have one-on-one sessions with women. And when they're telling me, no, I don't think I'm ready for that job. And I say, I think you are. And this is why I feel you can take the plunge, you can take the drive, and I will be there to support you. I will mentor you throughout the way. And my point here is, if we don't take risks on individuals that show that promise, that have that potential, and wait for them to feel that I have 150% of that before they apply, I think we will never get to parity.
Yeah. So instilling that confidence,
correct,
is part of the battle. I mean, I know that it's difficult for women. I imagine for women of color, it will be more difficult again. So, Brandee, anything you want to chime in with there?
Yeah. Again, going back to this idea of we need to set targets for the institution, but then we also need to really look at ourselves to say, what are the ways that we actually create barriers to achieving those ambitious targets? I'll give you a very small example. This is real life, real time. So I'm the first in my family to go to college. Nobody in my family had ever worked in a big corporation. I can remember how terrified I was the first day I came to work, and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth, because I was like, I don't really know what the rules are, the secret rules inside. So if I felt that way, I have empathy for others. I love, and what we do through our philanthropic work is we have a whole initiative around creating pathways to careers for people who don't have those networks and connections. And what we love is that I want to hire people with persistence and grit, and who've been able to figure it out without actually knowing what the rules are. Those are the kind of people we want on our teams. You know what I did the other day? I'm hiring for 2 key roles on my team, and I looked at one resume and I said, wow, put this person, make sure they get interviewed first, because they've Harvard Business School. I was impressed. I subconsciously have been taught that there must be something special about this individual. And as committed as I am to all of this, it's just the pattern that I fell into. So I just say, I would encourage all of us that when we find that we're on that autopilot, or that's our first reaction, to just say, I'd say persistence and grit and scrappiness is probably more important than the piece of paper diploma.
Oh, thanks, Brandee. Thanks for being so honest as well about how you're navigating this period. There's a question here that's asking about whether employees are putting the pressure on your organizations. So I wonder if you're noticing that, because to Brandee's point, that sometimes there's like an economic incentive to get things moving. If there's an employee push happening, that can also obviously help from the inside. So I just wondered, I guess we'll just go round and round. Adebola, would you start us off at what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, and if the question is, particular to this moment, if there's a greater employee push, I do think that individuals are being more vocal, are expressing, what they expect from us and from their organization. I think that other organizations are definitely seeing sort of their employees raising their voices, sharing ideas, what they're hearing and seeing, what would be important to them, what would be impactful to them. And for us, we sort of actively, as soon as everything kind of transpired over the last month or so, or 6 weeks, we actively, reached out to all of our employees, and we're fortunate enough that our employee base is small, so it's doable. But really, it was an opportunity to hear from individuals who were in the Black community to say, tell me about your experience, how you're feeling, what we can be doing, what we haven't been doing, what we could do more of, what you think is working well. Really is an opportunity to hear people's perspective, viewpoints, and their thoughts, but also to allow them to be a part of our solution, and allow them to feel as though they were playing a role in shaping ultimately what may be the next steps that the firm takes around refocusing and being more intentional around our inclusion and diversity efforts. And then asking for those who want to participate and help, in what ways do they want to be engaged and help be a part of that solution. And I think we've gotten a lot of individuals who've raised their hands for various components, whether it's community-oriented, social justice, organizations-oriented, volunteer, different projects that we're working on internally. And so I think it creates much more increased engagement, much more increased buy-in and support from individuals. And quite frankly, not just looking to our Black employees to help solve. I don't think that that's the only way, and really organizations shouldn't be hanging it on those individuals to come up with the solutions. But there are lots of individuals who have really great ideas, and quite frankly, you need everybody's buy-in and participation in order to really have an ability to move the needle and make waves and see progress, because all need to be participating.
I wonder, is there pressure from shareholders as well in some of your organizations of not, so it's not just sort of employee bottom up, but there's actually anyone, Nandita, are you seeing anything like that?
Yeah, so I would say our board, of course, our single shareholder is BNP Paribas, who's already very invested in all these issues. Our board at Bank of the West has been very engaged in diversity and inclusion programs all along. And they've, of course, stepped it up, and they want to hear exactly what we are doing to support our employees. And I will tell you, to Bola's point, the fact that our employees are coming back and telling us how much they appreciate us having these sessions called We Stand Together, or celebrating Juneteenth and closing our branches and our offices to celebrate Juneteenth, are having amazing impact. So that tells us that they want more of it. And we've got several resource groups. So it's not just the African American group, to Bola's point, but definitely all the other resource groups that are really getting involved with our teams to make sure people recognize as an institution, we have zero tolerance for racism. We have full support for creating an inclusive and a safe environment. So yes, we are hearing it from our board, our shareholders already interested in it, and our employees are extremely appreciative of everything we are doing. And we need to continue to do that. This is not episodic, right? It cannot be one and done. This has got to be something that becomes part of our DNA. And I really like what Brandee said about changing the mindset and questioning ourselves at every point to say, is this stereotyping? Is this micro inequity? Is that creating micro inequities? Completely agree with everything that is being said here.
Brandee, anything from you? And then I think we'll do a wrap up before we wrap up.
This will be very quick. So the other important stakeholder here, regulators. And regulators, particular, we've been participating in a task force that's been spearheaded by the OCC, the US banking regulator here in the US. I think that that is an incredibly important development that will add to looking at this on an institutional basis and making sure that it's not a one and done.
Oh, well, that's great. We should have a whole webinar on that as well. Yeah. That would make a huge impact. So just to wrap up, there's quite a few questions that have gone unanswered, and I feel bad about it. But so I wondered if each of you, maybe we could sort of just highlight very briefly, couple of minutes, the couple of things that you see have really worked in creating a more long-term change or deeper change than a one and done. It could be in any part of the business. I just wondered if you could share those that we can take away with us from today. Bola, do you want to go first, bringing this on you?
Sure. Yeah, so I think the one thing for our organization that has the pull through to impact all aspects of our inclusion and diversity effort is accountability. Ensuring that not just the most senior leaders in our organization feel accountable, but their direct reports and those who report into them also feel accountable. And that's accountable for recruiting, for rehiring, for developing, for training, for creating those inclusive environments for individuals within the organization. It's important that you ensure that the accountability cascades, because organizations have thousands of employees, and my experience is directly tied to the team that I sit on, the individuals that I'm surrounded by, my manager, and how they treat me. And so the ways that you create accountability are perhaps through performance systems and performance management and what you measure and require in terms of the skills and the levers that you're going to pull that are important to your culture. Accountabilities can be created through economics and compensation and what you reward individuals for in terms of their behavior. Accountability can be messaged from leadership and senior managers in terms of what they expect from their teams and require from their teams around behavior. And so, you know, the ways in which you can enforce accountability can look like a lot of different approaches and usually requires more than one and a multi-pronged approach. But for us, I think accountability has been one of the single most important components to ensuring that diversity and inclusion is part and parcel of our whole organization, that everybody is taking it seriously, that everybody is bought in, and that everybody is participating to really improve the organization, because it requires all of us to sort of get the job done, not just myself and not just other single individuals.
Thank you, Bola. Nandita?
Great question. I would say for BNP Paribas, for Bank of the West, and all other 72 affiliates around the world for BNP, it is about our focus on ESG. We've come out and made an extremely bold statement that we stand for climate change, we stand for environment, we stand for diversity and inclusion, women's rights, empowerment, he for she. We stand for youth and entrepreneurs. And that truly is, even in the US, a differentiator for us. And I can tell you that our employees feel proud to work for Bank of the West, BNP Paribas. Our customers come to us because of our programs and policies. And this is not just a brand image for us. This is who we are, and we really believe in it. And when you have a culture like that, you're not responding to COVID-19. You're not responding to the protests, because you build a character, and as a result, you invite employees to join the bank that are similar minded. And that is the culture, and that's who we are.
Thank you. Brandee?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just say, I think this all-in approach, agree 100% with the focus on what we do for our employees, our colleagues, our communities, how we use our corporate voice. I would say, though, that the strongest lever we have as financial institutions or being in the financial services industry is how do we deploy our core business capabilities, in particular to address the wealth gap, both gender gaps, racial gaps. I think we haven't fully mined how we deploy our core business capabilities. It's everything from what we do for our clients, how we use our supply chains, a lot of opportunities there, and I think a lot of room for innovation.
Wonderful. Culture, accountability, embedding it across all of our businesses, getting the regulators to step up, and we're going to have a coalition, a task force put together. It's been such a rich conversation. I'm so grateful to you. I know it's a lot of time out of your day, and thank you so much for being here and sharing this discussion. And thanks to all of you who've been listening and participating. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of the questions. So that's it from us. Again, thanks Bola and Nandita, Brandee, and thank you to the Finances Female team, Izzy, Jad, Sol, Philippa, who produced this panel. You'll receive an email with the link to view the recording on demand should you want to share it or re-watch. Stay tuned, we've got some other things coming up, as you can see on your screen right now. Our Spotlight series, which are going to be fantastic. But that is it from us. So thank you so much again to all of you. Stay well, and we'd love your feedback. So let us know, you know where to find us, and have a good rest of your day.